Name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today. I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked. Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
A scandal of two chairmen. Boris back in Ukraine. Crises affecting the economy and our energy supply. And the media is talking about seatbelts. We're going to explore an extraordinary weekend in politics and indeed what's to come in the week ahead after the news.
Good morning, it's 9:30. I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB newsroom. A source close to Nadeem Sahawi says he won't quit as Tory party chair despite growing pressure over his tax affairs. The former Chancellor has admitted he paid a penalty to HMRC following an error over shares in the polling company YouGov, which he co-founded. He hasn't disclosed the size of the settlement, which is believed to be almost £5 million. Labour wants the Prime Minister to sack him and come clean over whether he knew about the incident when he appointed him party chairman. Thousands of ambulance workers are striking for the third time in 5 weeks. Unison and GMB union members across England and Wales have walked out, along with staff at 2 hospital trusts in Liverpool. Further industrial action is planned in the coming weeks by nurses and other NHS workers. Union leaders are calling for fair pay, accusing the government of not wanting to find a resolution. The Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, says the action is hugely disappointing and warned patients of disruption. A 72-year-old man suspected of carrying out a mass shooting in California has been found dead by police. 10 people believed to be in their 50s and 60s were killed at a dance club in Monterey Park near Los Angeles at the weekend. 10 others were injured. Detectives say the suspect, Hu Can Tran, took his own life around 12 hours after the attack. Members of the public who intervened were praised by the county sheriff.
The weapon that was recovered from the Alhambra location, in which, remember, the suspect went to the Alhambra location after he conducted the shooting, and he was disarmed by two community members who I consider to be heroes because they saved lives.
Households with smart meters could receive discounts if they cut their energy use during peak times today. After successful trials, National Grid is launching its demand flexibility scheme for the first time between 5 and 6 p.m. 26 suppliers are signed up to the initiative. It's also ordered 3 coal plants to begin warming up as a contingency, with forecasters predicting supplies could be squeezed during today's cold snap. Boris Johnson has made a surprise visit to Ukraine. The former Prime Minister, who met President Zelensky in the capital Kyiv, said Britain would stick by the country for as long as it takes. The pair also walked the streets of war-torn Bucha, where hundreds of people were killed during Russian attacks. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Now it's back to the briefing with Tom.
A very good morning, it's 9:34 and this is The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, on your TV and your radio. Now, it's been another busy weekend. Another fixed penalty notice for the Prime Minister. This time not over cake, but over seatbelts. Also back paid taxes and questionable loans. It hasn't been a quiet couple of days for Number 10 or their press office. And in a move that raises eyebrows in Downing Street, a former occupant of that famous street flew off to Ukraine this weekend. Yes, Boris Johnson has a close bond with his friend Volodymyr Zelensky and clearly sees a major part of his post-prime ministerial role as championing the Ukrainian cause. Yet some have questioned the timing of this visit as questions arise from his dealings with the current chairman of the BBC, Richard Sharp. Mr Sharp stands accused of being involved in helping to arrange a guarantor of a loan of up to £800,000 for Boris Johnson in late 2020. Sharp, however, says he simply connected people. And lastly, to the Tory party chairman and former Chancellor Nadhim Zahawi, questions of judgment and allegations of tax dodging have arisen over his finances after he agreed to pay a £1 million fine. HMRC have described the situation that led to the fine, which was settled while Zahawi was Chancellor, as careless but not deliberate. But Labour are calling for his resignation, so there is an enormous amount to get stuck into. I'm delighted to be joined by the biographer of Boris Johnson and, of course, esteemed journalist Tom Bower, who most recently wrote a book, Boris Johnson, The Gambler. And I wonder, Tom Bower, just starting off today, has Boris Johnson taken a gamble here in terms of dashing off to Ukraine, meeting with Zelensky? Is this trying to distract from some troubles relating to that facilitation of their £800,000 loan?
I fear it is. I mean, he had a habit, even as Prime Minister, of constantly going around the country appearing in his yellow high-vis jackets, meeting builders or teachers or hospital workers to get away from the problems at his desk in Downing Street. And he really does believe that if he is seen in action on video, somehow people will forgive him or forget the accusations he's facing. But they won't forget or they won't forgive. He needs to sit down and fess up and explain his own conduct.
It is interesting because it does seem that Boris Johnson has been pretty cavalier with personal finances. We know he spends a lot, he's got a lot of children, and he does have a large network of people who are willing to give him quite a lot of money. I wonder, in the context of all of this, is that damaging for Boris Johnson and any potential comeback that may well be planned for the future?
Absolutely, of course it is. And the problem is it started with the dreadful decoration of Downing Street and the strange contortions he went through to try and find the money for more than £250,000 of ridiculous embellishments to that flat in number 11. His wife, of course, was very responsible for that. But I've got to tell you, I think with Boris, the problem is he has no concept of money. If he'd earned 100,000, he'd spend 150,000. And in that, of course, he's very familiar with the life of Winston Churchill, who was constantly facing bankruptcy and debt, and even had to sell his home at Charwell to pay for his debts. Churchill constantly earned vast sums and spent even more. And Boris seems to have absolutely no concept of how to keep control of his private finances, and is now going to come and haunt him.
This is a fascinating comparison because I suppose, are we being too harsh here? If we look to historical comparisons, Winston Churchill, of course, famously not good with his own money, but so was Disraeli, of course, had financial problems. And going even back further, Pitt the Younger had enormous financial problems personally, although with the country's finances, he was really quite good and financed the Napoleonic Wars in an incredible way. I wonder if we can make a separation here between the personal mess, as we've seen in many prime ministers of history, and perhaps a difference in a professional life.
Well, I suppose Boris wishes you could, but unfortunately, he was turfed out of office for lying. And that's the problem he now faces, that his record in office, having won that stupendous majority, is one of total and unfortunate decline. And it seems like leaving a legacy of a mess and the images of chaos, both in Downing Street and in his personal life. And I think that is what's sharply undermining his hopes of a return, of a comeback. I mean, unless he actually faces his own weaknesses and faces his own errors and repairs, and to some extent shows remorse, I think he can appear however many times he wants in Ukraine. It just won't form the basis of a recovery and return to Downing Street, which is, of course, what he wants.
And yet his sort of magnetism in Ukraine is hard to be overestimated. He's received a Medal of Freedom from Vladimir Zelensky. He was given honorary citizenship of Kyiv. There are streets named after him. When he resigned as Prime Minister, the national railway operator of Ukraine replaced their logo on social media to have a little mop of blonde hair on top of it. It's incredible, the sort of esteem with which Boris Johnson is held in Ukraine. Is that something we recognise fully enough in this country?
Hopefully not. I don't see why, because he's a hero in Ukraine, people in England and Scotland who can't get their train on the 3rd of February because of yet another strike, who can't get hospital appointments, who face striking teachers and the whole thing, should in any way thank God Boris is revered as a hero in Ukraine. I mean, that's the problem. He thinks because he's a hero 3,000 miles away or whatever it is, that somehow he should be a hero in his own country. He may be a hero in his own home, which I sometimes even doubt, but he ain't a hero here, and he needs to recognize that. So he can go as often as he likes to Kiev and posture with Zelensky, who deserves as much support as we can give him, but it's not going to help him in Britain, and it's not going to help the Tory party either.
It's interesting you draw this comparison between Boris Johnson and Winston Churchill earlier for perhaps a haphazard approach to personal finances. I wonder, are there other parallels that can be drawn? Boris Johnson was not seen as a particularly... Oh, sorry, I'm getting over myself there. Winston Churchill was not seen as a good Home Secretary. He had scandal after scandal. He crossed the floor from one party to another. He spent almost 20 years in the political wilderness, being a lone voice criticising Hitler and the Nazi Party before sort of making a miraculous comeback. Is there a possible way that we could see Boris Johnson have some of those years in the wilderness, criticise Vladimir Putin and his gangster regime in Russia, and perhaps find some way to come back, perhaps years down the line?
Well, I think that is possible, but I think Boris's years in the wilderness were before 2019, when he won that stupendous election, became Prime Minister. The problem is, regretfully for him and his passionate supporters, that his 2 years in office, beset as they were by COVID, but also undermined by his wife, Carrie, left the country with a legacy of having enough. I mean, the Tory party turfed him out. They didn't turf Winston Churchill out. And so I think the parallel does work if Boris would somehow build up some sort of credibility over the next 5-10 years. I don't know whether he's got the patience for it. I don't know whether he's got the stamina to understand that it needs a lot of hard work to build a recovery after you've been thrown out of the way he was. But I don't see that at the moment. And I thought his attempt to stand for election once Liz Truss resigned was very foolish. It was far too early. It showed a lack of contrition, a lack of self-awareness. So I really do think the focus is now on Sunak and whether he can rebuild the Tory party over the next 12 months.
So just finally,
And
with
if I could
regards...
just say something about all the sleaze allegations this weekend.
Yes.
They are awful. There's no doubt Zahawi and the rest is pretty bad. But don't forget that the Labour government in 1997 was very quickly submerged in the appalling sleaze of Bernie Ecclestone, of Geoffrey Robinson, Peter Mandelson, Gordon Brown taking money from very questionable sources, Tony Blair being the man, the Minister of Tat. You know, sleaze attaches itself to all politicians at a certain time. And so whatever the Tory party's government is facing now, Labour faced far worse in their period in office. It was far more guilty of taking bribes and the rest and pocketing money from questionable people like the Hindujas. So let's get carried away because one party chairman didn't regulate his tax affairs properly.
Interesting, because when we're looking at all of this, just very finally, does Rishi Sunak now find himself in an irrecoverable position? Are we now seeing sort of the death throes of a Tory government that has thrown away its majority, really? Is this the late 1990s in terms of all of those scandals that we saw sort of around John Major's government? Or are we thinking that perhaps this is actually just what happens to politicians all the time? Are we perhaps reading too much into it?
Well, I think you can do it both ways. But I think history shows that everything now depends on how Sunak communicates. How he communicates the recovery, how he communicates that the recession is not so bad, how he faces the trade unions and articulates why outrageous demands cannot be met if we don't want to fuel inflation. Everything depends on how Sunak conducts himself and communicates with the electorate. He's got enough time, but whether he's got the right people and the right advisors, that is, I think, open to doubt. And to have a party chairman who himself is now under a cloud is not helpful. So he's got a few months to recover, and he can do it from as far as the Tory party is concerned. But he needs to really exercise enormous amount of self-control and leadership and communicate. And that, I think, is the question, whether he's got the ability to do that.
Well, Tom Bauer, thank you so much for talking us through those big issues facing the day. Really appreciate your time here this morning on The Briefing. Let's bring in now our political reporter, Catherine Foster, because we were talking there about Zahawi. We were talking about this big issue, which may well be running and might well reach a crescendo point, perhaps at Prime Minister's Questions on Wednesday, perhaps beforehand.
Well, yes. Last week in Prime Minister's Questions, Rishi Sunak made it clear that as far as he was concerned, there was nothing to see here regarding Nadhim Zahawi, and it was all done and dusted. But there were many questions. Now, we've had some answers, haven't we, over the weekend. We don't know the precise figure, but it looks like he had to pay in back tax and a penalty just shy of £5 million regarding YouGov shares and the connection with his father. We know that this happened while he was Chancellor of the Exchequer during the summer under Boris Johnson. So he was effectively the boss of the HMRC while dealing with a dispute with HMRC. So that all has been admitted. Now he's saying it was careless, it wasn't deliberate, it was an error. He's paid it, it's all been sorted. But given his position, he is chair of the Conservative Party. Given that he was Chancellor, it certainly isn't a good look. And I don't think the questions are going to go away. Now, Labour are calling for him to go, as of course they would. But I think what's worrying for Rishi Sunak and for Nadhim Zahawi is the Conservatives also are not being particularly effusive in their support of him, to put it mildly.
I wonder if perhaps this is more about timing and transparency than it is about the actuality, because it's HMRC themselves that are also saying this is sort of more likely carelessness than malice or deliberate tax evasion.
Yeah, but it's a large sum of money, isn't it? And the thing is that Rishi Sunak came in, he stood outside Downing Street, he said this government will have integrity, professionalism and accountability at its heart. And now, in quick succession over the last few days, Sunak wasn't wearing a seatbelt. We've got the questions about Boris Johnson and the BBC boss and the £800,000 loan. And so this trio of events that don't look good. Now, OK, Rishi Sunak will say, well, this is a new government. But I doubt that the public see it that way. Conservatives are still in power, as they have been for a long time. Rishi Sunak might like to come across as squeaky clean. He doesn't drink. OK, didn't wear a safety belt. But the party is still much the same. And this feeds into that narrative of you can't trust the Tories.
Well, Catherine Foster, thank you so much for talking us through that. No doubt the Labour Party will be pushing this hard over the coming hours and indeed days. We'll follow it closely too. But turning now to something that we briefly touched upon there. The Prime Minister has broken the law. On Friday night, he became the second ever Prime Minister to have been found to have broken the law, or at least to have been fined by the police. Because let's not forget, this is over a seatbelt. A seatbelt. And to me, this case highlights a lot of problems with this country in this decade. We face our highest tax burden on record. This year, the tax competitiveness of the UK is set to fall from 5th in the OECD to 30th. 30th out of 38 developed countries. We face plunging birth rates, a housing crisis, sluggish economic growth, flatlining productivity, labour shortages, and unemployment to boot. Yet, what did the first full half of our daily lobby briefing in number 9 Downing Street consist of on Friday? Questions about seatbelts. Yes, seatbelts. Back and forth about an issue that is so painfully trivial. An issue that should not be taking up column inches, front pages, or indeed government time. Yet, this morning, the front page of the Daily Mirror is still obsessing over it. Not only writing about the Prime Minister's seatbelt, but providing a picture to boot. This is not serious. Now, legitimately, you might say that seatbelts are serious. They do save lives. And yes, they do, but this is about consistency. Aside from the fact that Rishi Sunak's prime ministerial car is an outridden, blue lights flashing, armour-plated, bulletproof, windowed, chemical attack-resistant machine, aside from that, the crucial point is that while Rishi Sunak was the first prime minister to be fined for not wearing a seatbelt, he emphatically was not the first politician to not have worn a seatbelt. It was almost comically easy on Friday to discover pictures and videos of Labour prime ministers and politicians doing precisely the same thing. Yet at that time, there was no media outcry, no witch hunt, no fixed penalty notice. Perhaps most incisively, Tony Blair not wearing a seatbelt was even written about in The Guardian in 2007. The piece reads, "Now I notice that the Prime Minister wears no seatbelt. When I tenderly point this out to him, he gives an emphatic shrug." And there we have it. In 2007, the media talking about this trivial issue in a trivial way. In 2023, the media talking about this trivial issue as if the Prime Minister should be fined, as if this is part of a devalued government, as if this is a big political issue. Now, if that doesn't look like double standards, I don't know what does. Now, finally this morning, to one of those substantive issues that I do wish the media would be talking more about. Indeed, we are facing sluggish growth in the United Kingdom. So, too, is most of Western Europe. But particularly, one problem in this country seems worse than many of our competitive nations. And that's housing. Let's speak to the director of the Centre for Policy Studies, Robert Colville, who has an excellent piece in The Times over the weekend on this very issue. Now, Robert, just to give us a scale of this problem, I believe you had a very, very stark fact in terms of the number of houses that were built in the 30 years leading to 1990 compared to the 30 years after 1990.
Yes, in the 30 years before 1990, we built 7.5 million homes as a country. In the 30 years after it, we built 3.3 million homes. Now, you can say that there is an issue there around, the fact that we were demolishing homes at the same time to build tower blocks and stuff. But if you look at the rate at which we've been adding to housing stock, it's basically halved since the 1950s. And this at a time when, as everyone knows, our population has increased very, very substantially. It's just pretty clear we have not built enough homes to the tune of, several million.
To those who say that the issue here isn't that we haven't built homes, it's that we have too many people, it's that population growth has been too fast. Would it be an easier thing for the government to try and control population growth?
Well, I'm sympathetic to the argument that immigration plays a role in housing demand, because obviously it does. But if we cut off immigration to zero at this point, we would still need to build an awful lot more homes. This is driven by immigration. It's also driven by the fact we have an aging population. People are marrying later. People are tending to live more at home. But if you look at the statistics, in just the last few years, there have been 1 million more people, young people, who are living with their parents for lack of homes. That's nothing to do with immigration. Sorry. I'm sorry.
I'll let you get a glass of water. Perhaps I'll ask a long question in the meantime. Why is it very important that housing is built? Why does this affect other issues like productivity and economic growth?
Sure. So housing is one of those issues which its impact spreads across the economy. Most obviously, people want places to live, and they need places to live, and they deserve places to live. The more expensive it gets to do that, the tougher it is. That has impacts on family formation. It means people form families later. They have children later. Sometimes they don't have children at all because they can't. They don't have any room for them. As you say, it affects productivity because a really obvious point about is about how an economy grows is that you want the most talented people to be living close to the highest earning jobs and the highest performing companies. Now, if no one can actually afford to, if you take a place like Cambridge, it's got lots and lots of biotech, lots and lots of companies there. If we're not building any lab space for those companies, if we're not building any homes for the workers, if no one can actually afford to move to that place and live there and work there, then that's bad for the economy.
No, that was really, really stark when you put it in those terms. And it does show, especially when I look at these international comparisons, how many homes France is building compared to the United Kingdom. It's incredible that the UK's GDP is, I suppose, even slightly positive over the last few decades. We really are holding ourselves back.
Yeah, housing is a crucial contributor to GDP. And by the way, people will say France is bigger than us, but the Netherlands is not bigger than us. And the Netherlands has built an awful lot of houses too. We now have, among the smallest number of dwellings per person of anywhere in Europe. And we have the 4th lowest home ownership rates. All of this stuff is not simple. But it's not about GDP. I think the mistake that people like me sometimes make is to make it sound as though it's about GDP. Obviously, if house building is low, then the economy does suffer. But fundamentally, it's about people being able to afford places to live, being able to afford homes of their own, and I think that, and partly that's about interest rates, but also it's about the number of houses we build.
Really, really stark societal questions there, and yet the political will on this issue does not seem to be as forthcoming as perhaps it should. Robert Colville, thank you so much for joining us here, of course, director of the CPS and indeed author or co-author, I should say, of the 2019 Conservative Manifesto. Well, that's it. That's all the time we have in this morning on The Briefing. So coming up, it's Bev Turner Today. Stick around for that.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. on TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store. You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me! And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything